story was given to me by Ruth Debelius, who was the secretary at the school where I was teaching. And she had gotten the story from her boss, the principal of the school, who always said that he was going to write it up and send it to a magazine or something, because he had heard it at the Lions Club or someplace in Ballston Spa. But he didn't do that, and Ruth had no intention of doing it. So she gave me the story, so I'm indebted to her for that. Oh, it was so hot. Oh, it was one of those weeks in the summer when it gets up to 90 and doesn't quit. It was just unbearably hot all day long and into the night. And the little boys in Ballston Spa had just about run out of things that they could do. They were a bunch of them were standing under a tree, and their bicycles were on the ground, and their knickers were unbuttoned, and their shirts were hanging open. And they, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And one of them said, I've got an idea. Let's go down to the Cateros and go skinny dipping. Oh, said Art, you can't do that. Somebody will see us. Oh, if we go down and walk along the creek till it goes around that bend, nobody's going to walk that far on a day like this. We'll be perfectly safe. Nobody will see us. So they took their bikes and down Blizzardorf's Hill they went, up to the creek, turned right at the creek and went around till it formed that circle around. Oh, would you believe? The Cateros was almost dry. Only mud puddles here and there. Art said, you can't go skinny dipping in a mud puddle. No, we couldn't. What are we going to do now? Well, Red said, let's go up and sit on our veranda. At least it'll be shady up there. So they took their bikes and they trudged up Blizzardorf's Hill. Oh, that's a tough one to do, walk all the way up there. They went over to Gardner's house and they sat on the veranda. Now, Mrs. Gardner knew they were coming, so she was out in the kitchen and she took her cut glass pitcher, nice big pitcher. She went out on the back porch where the ice box was, and she took the ice pick off the nail, and she went over and she opened the compartment where the block of ice was, and she chunked off a nice big piece of ice, and she took that and put it in the cut glass pitcher. Then she picked up all the shards that were on there and put those in the pitcher too. And she went back out in the kitchen and she got a lemon reamer, and she reamed those lemons, got every last bit of drop that she could, and she put the juice in the pitcher, and then she put 2 of the or lemon rinds in for added flavor. She put a whole lot of sugar in and ice cold water. And she put that on the tray with the glasses, started down the long hall. The boys could hear her coming because they could hear the clink of that ice on the pitcher. And they were ready. And so she poured a nice big glass for each one of them. And they took their glass. Oh, it was cold. Oh, it felt wonderful. Oh, it was cold. And then they took a sip, and it was tart, and it was sweet, and it went all the way down. Oh, they made it last just as long as they could. They took tiny, tiny sips. Oh, it was wonderful. But everything comes to an end, and that did too. Now what are we going to do? They had run about through everything they could think of to do. But Hank said, I have a really good idea. Let's go up in the north end and climb up in the water tower and go in there and have a swim in the water tower. Oh, you can't do that, the fellow said. You can't. There are signs all over. Danger, keep out. This means no entrance. You can't do that. Oh, who's going to be out to look at it? Well, then besides that, we have to cross the Blue Mill Bridge. And you know those North End toughs are just waiting for some kids from the South End. Oh, they'll destroy us. As dumb as they are, do you think that they're going to be standing out there? There isn't a bit of shade for blocks around. Come on, let's go. Get your bicycles and let's go. So down they went, down Milton Avenue, across the Blue Mill Bridge, not a soul there. They went up as far as they could up in the north end. They dropped the bicycles, and there was the fence with all the signs. This means you. But they paid no attention. Over the fence, up the ladder on the front, and around the catwalk, and up the ladder on the back, and into the water. Oh, cool water on their hot bodies. They started to splash themselves. Then they splashed each other. Then they had all kinds of races to see who could last the longest underwater, who could float, all kinds of things. They were having a wonderful time. I was just enjoying themselves. And meanwhile, they had no conception of time, but 3:30 was a magic hour down on the flats in Ballston Spa, where all the people were working in that beastly hot, waiting for the closing hour. 3:30 was the magic hour. All the people working down there were waiting, watching the clock, waiting for 3:30. Now, down in the sock mill, people didn't have any air conditioning, of course, no fans. And if you opened the window, that only made the woolen lint come through the air and go down in the cuffs of the workers and down in the collars. And it was itchy and hot. And they'd say, "Close that window." There was no chance of getting a breath of fresh air there. And everybody's waiting for the closing hour. Down in the factory where they made the gloves, the women were pushing that heavy hide through those sewing machines with their hands, and the hides had been dyed, and the dye was coming off on their hands, and as they moved the sweat off their brow and off their face, the dye was coming off too, and they looked like circus clowns, and they felt terrible, but they couldn't go in and wash off or wash their face or their hands, because they only got paid for each piece that went through those sewing machines. And if you didn't put a piece through, you didn't get paid at that point. So you kept working, and your eyes would dart up to see the clock. How many minutes more till it was 3:30? But the worst of all was down at the tannery, because down in the tannery they had these beds in the floor, and the beds were full of water with chemicals. And then they would put the hides with the hair still on them right in that mixture in those tubs down there. And the smell was absolutely disgusting. It was bad enough in the wintertime, but under the conditions of all that heat for day after day after day, it was revolting. And the men kept saying, "Oh, I can't wait to get home and get in a tub or put my head in the sink and get washed up. Oh, I can't wait. It's 18 minutes till it's 3:30. They all knew exactly what time it was. And finally, merciful heavens, it was 3:30, and the workers poured into the streets of Ballston Spa, and they all walked home, thinking, I can't wait. When they got there, they turned on the faucets and the taps and the spigots, and they filled up the tub and the basin and the sink, and there was a sudden demand for water. And that's what the water tower was all about. It was there to provide water for a sudden need. And so the water began to come out into the pipe and away from the water tower. And at first the boys up in the tower didn't notice. They were having such a great time. They didn't notice that the water was going out. And Art said, "Look at me, I've learned to float on my back, and he's pointing up at the top, and the boys looked, and there was the top of the tower, and there they were. Oh, they panicked. They began to shout and carry on and jump, trying to jump, reaching. And of course they couldn't reach that high. And finally one of them said, "Now wait a minute, we've got to get organized here. We've got to go, one fellow stand down on the bottom, another on his shoulders, and another on his shoulders, and make a human ladder, and the last guy up will go over the top and go down to the Union Fire Company. There's sure to be somebody down there that'll help." So Frank Hart, one of those guys, I guess it was Hank. He was a big, strong fellow, and he said, "I'll go down first, and you fellas climb up as fast as you can." But the truth of the matter was there was a lot of water gone from the tank, but there was a lot of water still on the bottom, and the fellow in the bottom was going to be underwater and would have to hold his breath for quite a while. So Hank went down with his mighty breath of air, and the fellas just scrambled, and they fell off, and finally he had to come up. Could not hold his breath another second. And Art said, "Let me try." And they said, "You're too small. You can't do it, but let me try." So Art went down, and the boys scrambled again, and Art had to come up. He couldn't hold his breath either. Then Steve said, "Now I want to try." Now Steve wasn't really a member of the gang. His folks had just come over from the old country, and they talked funny, and they wore funny clothes, and their food smelled kind of funny too. But Steve was strong, and he knew how to do things too. He said, "Now, you have to be ready. You have to be in line. 1, 2, 3, 4. Fast. No scramble, no scramble. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, we're ready." So Steve went down, and the boys went up 1, 2, 3, 4, and the last one could almost reach the top. And he said, "Come on, fellas, stretch." And they all stretched as much as they could, and he grabbed the top of that and pulled himself up and over, and down he went, down the ladder and around the catwalk, down the ladder, over the fence, pulled on a pair of pants. Then he picked up any old bicycle, went down the hill, down as far as the Union Fire Company. Now, some of the Whalen fellas were down there, and some of the Thomas boys were there. And when they heard the story, they put the ladder on the rig and got the horse and put the horse on the rig, and away they went up as far as they could go. Then they took the ladder off, went up the ladder, around the catwalk, up the other ladder, and put their ladder down into the water and saved the boys. Now, it's entirely possible that sometime when it was awfully, awfully, awfully hot, the boys might have decided to go for another swim. But if they did, you can bet your boots that they watched that water level as if their lives depended on it.